Welcome to Uplifting Humans, where we honor, empower, educate, and inspire the listener with real stories and expert advice. Our guest today is Luke Sellars. Luke was first introduced to meditation 14 years ago as a possible solution to his mental illness and addiction due to brain trauma from playing professional ice hockey. He has developed his approach to self realization and self mastery through his experiences as an ice hockey player and dedicated practitioner of Kriya Yoga, heart meditation, mindfulness, and Tibetan heart imagery over the past 16 years. Welcome, Luke.
Thank you for having me, Sal. It's an honor for me to be here with you and really
Oh,
nice to reconnect.
reconnect. Yes, it's such a privilege to bring Luke, because I think, Luke, your story is an amazing, amazing journey. I bow to anybody who has been through what you've been through in life. And so I'm so glad that you are able to join us. So uh, let's start with your childhood, Luke. Can you share with the listeners what your childhood was like?
Definitely. Growing up in Canada and being involved in hockey, it's, I think, a story that people know real well. I'm really fortunate to grow up with a wonderful family, really, really beautiful parents. One of the most amazing memories I have from when I was really young is I used to ride up and down the street on one of those big wheels, the three wheelers,
Oh,
in
yes.
my diaper, holding the plunger, thinking I was some sort of knight in shining armor on a on a horse. But my parents really good. I mean, they're still together to this day. I was born in Scarborough, and they moved out to Pickering. And childhood was interesting because back then, playing hockey at the AAA level, they only had a league in Toronto. So at grade 4, there was a zoning issue, so I had to live within the area of Toronto. So I moved in with my grandmother from grade 4 to 6. So everything was really directed towards hockey. I was fortunate that my parents weren't ones that pushed me in the sport,
Mm-hmm.
like you see a lot of what's going on today.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a pretty normal childhood. A lot of time spent at the rink, and really just growing up in a really really good environment. And my parents really just worked hard. My mom was a nurse, and my dad an accountant, and they really dedicated their lives to providing for their children and creating an environment in a household where there was a lot of love and a lot of support. And me and my sister Shannon really fortunate to have been raised in that way.
Isn't that beautiful? So now you're living with grandma, and how was that living with grandma? Was that your typical, grandson grandmother relationship, or anything that really stands out?
Well, my childhood, looking back now, is there's a lot of things that were kind of going on. Recently you come to understand that I'm on the spectrum of Asperger's. So there was a lot of things in childhood there, and not really fitting in so much, and also playing hockey at a high level. You're not really around in the evenings. You're practicing a lot, so you don't have the ability to grow up as a normal kid, so to say, where you're hanging out with your friends from school after school and those sorts of things. And leaving my home school in Pickering after grade 3 and going to school in Scarborough at Centennial Road from grade 4 to 6 created more separation. Now you're going into a school where you don't really know anybody, and you're kind of on the perimeter, so to say. You don't really have any real strong friendships within school because you're not spending much time outside of school with those kids, because I was living in Pickering still. I mean, I was spending time at my grandma's before and after school, and on paper I lived with her so that I had an address there.
Yes.
But we had a really good relationship. My grandmother was a really beautiful woman, my dad's mother, and
Yeah.
she had just recently moved back to Canada, because she had been living in Bermuda with my grandfather, my dad's dad, who had passed away of a heart attack in his 50s. So
Mm.
my grandma had brought herself back to Canada, where she was closer to our family and that, and I got to spend a lot of time with her, which was really, I really value those times as a child, because as I grew older into my teenage years and left home to play junior hockey and then professional hockey, her health took a downward spiral, and she spent the last 10, 15 years of her life really not so with it because of some minor strokes and that. So the memories of spending time with her, I'll never forget. Whenever I'd show up there in the morning, she'd always make me English muffins with peanut butter. So I'd get a second breakfast where my mom and my dad would drop me off at her home, and we'd spend time together, and then I'd walk to school and that. So, but it was an interesting dynamic, being in a sport at a high level. I think childhood, for kids at that level, is when the sport is the most fun. However, there's a lot of things that we don't really get to experience and develop our own identities as just regular children, because there's so much time and emphasis put on sport.
Yes, yes. And did you feel that, I mean, obviously when a child goes into any sport, it's for the love and the passion and the fun of the sport. At what point did you feel like the love and the passion or the fun of it was taken out? Because I think there's this, there's there's a huge shift that takes place when the fun is not there anymore.
It's my fondest memories of playing hockey were as a child and as a kid, playing on outdoor rinks for 8-10 hours a day. I mean, it's you wouldn't even be able to feel your hands and your toes with your friends, and envisioning that you're scoring the winning goal in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And I mean, that's my fondest memories of hockey, really. And in organized hockey back when I was playing, 30 years ago or so, it wasn't the same way it is today. I really believe now it's almost inhumane the way that childhood hockey and really hockey's happening in Canada, because it's more of the adults living vicariously through these young children. So, at the age of, I think it was about 15, the Central Scouting came out. So in hockey, they have this Central Scouting ratings, and this was for the OHL, the Canadian Hockey League. And I was playing junior hockey in Toronto, and I was ranked to be drafted in the first round. So that's when things kind of got real, where now all of a sudden you've got agents showing up at your hockey games, and now it's, this could possibly become a business. For me, though, I was never in that state, and I don't think kids back then were so much had their heads up in the clouds of wanting to play in the NHL so much. I was fortunate to play for an organization, the Wexford Raiders, which we won a ton of championships. So I was still having fun being a kid. But the minute that it started to get real in the context that you could make money playing this game is when all the adults started showing up, swarming you. Agents wanting to take you to dinner, wanting to, and you're 16 years old. It's like, you don't know. I don't know anything about, I still don't know anything about life. Back then, I was fortunate to have parents that were really balanced and really supportive of me. But it's not reality. It's a different sport. Is a completely different beast that we admire so much and look up to so much. But I think there's a bit of a distortion there in what's really important, because there isn't really a lot of humanness within sport. You're a number, and if you win, you're good, and if you lose, you're bad. So it's always trying to get somewhere. And then even when you get to that thing, you don't even celebrate a win because you got to get ready for the next game. So the season, that 8 months, there's no real presence to the whole, you score a goal or that, maybe you have that kind of, but it's looking back now, a really amazing experience, but also a really difficult one, especially with a lot of the tendencies that this type of living conditioned into me later in life.
Yes. Well, as adults, we do have a real fine knack of taking the fun out of things and commercializing and making sure that a child is no longer a child, because we're gonna make sure that we get every dime and nickel out of them. Unfortunately, that is the way it is. So we're gonna kind of fast forward just a little bit. So now you're a teenager, and obviously you were going to school. How was your school life? There's a lot of parents out there and they're thinking they're doing the right thing. How was your school life?
School for me was difficult. Again, if we go back to, early in school, I didn't develop those real deep bonds and friendships. Most of those deep bonds and friendships were the guys I was playing hockey with, kids who all lived in Toronto, and I was living in Pickering. So high school was a difficult start for me. I was bullied really heavily in my ninth year of high school, and I was a really good hockey player, which kind of added to it. But I was a little bit on the smaller side at that point. My parents, huge advocates of school. Then I was drafted to the OHL to Ottawa, 19th overall, and left my home after grade 10 and didn't go to school anymore.
Oh.
Where I played junior hockey, it was if you could walk, you played, and if you won, you drank. And they didn't. Our head coach had such a long-standing tradition in that the culture of that team, and you really didn't have to go to school. I mean, I remember at the end of my junior career at the age of 20, I think I had 16 credits and you needed 20 credits and you needed 30 to pass. And our general manager called the guidance counselor at the high school and said, this kid needs a diploma. And I had one within a couple weeks in the mail. So as a junior hockey player, school was more about going there to, hang out with girls and, just really, it just wasn't a good lifestyle. It was, my parents are at home thinking I'm going to school on a regular basis. And there I am in an environment in Ottawa where we had a lot of notoriety. So you're a young man with abilities and privileges that nobody at the age of 17 or 18 should have. So it was the foundation that was laid for a lot of difficult experiences later in life, but also a beautiful, beautiful time for me because I won a championship there. Again, very competitive in the nature of growing up in sport. But school was kind of obsolete. I wasn't interested in it. I didn't enjoy it. I don't think I even had really even written an essay in my life. I mean, if you asked me to do long division today, I'd have to look up how to do it. And I didn't pick my first book up and really read it until I was about 26 or so, 25, 26. I just kind of skimmed by in school to the best of my ability. I mean, I remember when I first went to high school in grade 9, I had a friend of mine who had really beautiful handwriting, like a woman's. And at the start of the year, I had him write me about 30 letters as though he was my mom. So I would use those letters to be able to skip out of class until I got caught one day taking the GO train down to Toronto to actually scalp Toronto Blue Jays tickets. And the high school had called my mom, which was a bit of a disaster. So I'd been suspended from school and public school for fighting and suspended in high school. So I wasn't exactly, I got into a lot of trouble. I drove my parents crazy. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, people go through all sorts of ways of waking up and realization. So obviously you didn't go into post-secondary. I'm
No.
taking, okay. And so were you into drugs and alcohol and the whole scene, womanizing, the whole 9 yards?
Yeah, I got, at the age of 15, I was playing hockey on a team with guys that were 19 and 20. And that's when, it was kind of periodic, this part of the sport and the culture, drinking and that. It's some interesting things happened to me. I didn't realize, I wasn't aware of this one trauma up until about 12 months ago. I mean, it takes us so long to really get to the core fundamental traumas in this life on a subconscious level. And recently, through all the cleaning work and the way that I've been living, I got back to that fundamental trauma. At the age of 6, I was molested. And that trauma stored in my subconscious. And again, I had a family environment where my parents were absolutely incredible. And they actually went out to dinner one night and left me with a babysitter, a female babysitter. And I was there with my 6-year-old best friend at the time. And her boyfriend proceeded to come over. And during the course of that night, we were watching them have sex. And then his friend had come over and there was molestation that took place while the boyfriend and the girl were upstairs. And I was downstairs with the friend molesting me. And that was something that was stored away in my subconscious, literally. I mean, my parents could remember coming home early from dinner and catching the babysitter upstairs in the bedroom, which was someone who had babysat on the street and somebody that was, my parents knew well. So it was, it's just amazing to me that, even for parents out there that, do as much as they possibly can to create safe environments for their children. And my parents were the best at it. I mean, I had strict rules and these types of things. There's still the way that the planet's functioning. It's just unfortunate that these things need to happen, or I shouldn't say need to happen, but they do happen. Yeah. So that trauma was one that stuck in my subconscious. And then at the age of 11, I had surgery on my stomach for something called a varicocele, which is basically there's too much blood being sent into the one testicle. So I had that surgery done, and that surgery severed off the electricity going into my prostate to some degree because of the meridians, the way they were cut. And I actually grew up throughout my teenage years not producing the testosterone that a normal young man would, which caused issues with regards to being interested in sex and things like that. Sexually, I could be active, but having the interest in it was not there. And then, so drinking was something, and partying was started the part of the culture, and I was a social guy. I mean, I loved the locker room and the culture of being around the guys more than I did playing hockey, but it definitely laid the foundation for heavy drinking. That was never seen to be something that was, a problem or out of the ordinary. Then at the age of 19, I was introduced to cocaine. And that's when the game changed, because cocaine for me stimulated me sexually in a way that I had never experienced before. And because I had grown up in a household where my parents were, I wouldn't say overly strict, but they were really interested in what was going on in me and my sister's lives. And they were always around. Even though my mom worked shift work in the hospital, there was always a parent around after school and things like that. So we had freedom, but not a ton of freedom to get mixed up into bad things. So when I got out of the nest at 16 and found myself in Ottawa, it was kind of like letting the lion out of the cage. So I did like to drink and party and have fun, but I was playing hockey in that. But at 19, when I was introduced to cocaine, and then being stimulated in this way sexually throughout my 20s I was a heavy womanizer. Thank God for his forgiveness, because I never hurt a woman intentionally or physically, but I slept with a lot of them, and without any really regard for who they were or that. And I did a lot, and most of those sexual interactions were while using cocaine and drinking heavily. So the amount of time and energy it's taken me to clean a lot of the energy of those experiences, because as we know, every substance that we consume opens a portal. You drink chamomile and it opens a portal. It's a very gentle one, but cocaine and these stimulants, you get mixing around in a lot of really dark energies and the alcohol and that. So, I went down, I was still a guy that was, would party here and there, and then entered into my 20s as a professional hockey player, and, really struggled in my first few years because I still had the behaviors off ice that weren't necessarily the most savory. And I really didn't figure out that I was now playing with men 38 years of age, and I'm at the age of 20, where in junior hockey I could get by with that type of behavior. At 23, I suffered an injury in my knee, went in for surgery, and I've got a staph infection post-surgery, which put me in the hospital for about 2 or 3 weeks. And that's when things really went down a dark path for me, because I was told I was never going to play the game again. I remember sitting there in that hospital bed and waking up because the staph infection had been misdiagnosed. So I was walking around with it for 8 or 10 days. And it was one that's, for anyone who's familiar with this type of infection, resistant to penicillin. It's called MRSA. So I was in the hospital, I was about 10 or 12 hours away from them cutting my leg off because of the nature of the infection. And then from there, I was basically on my own for a couple of years. There was a lot of trouble that came to the forefront, arrests and getting in trouble with the law, and a lot of really heavy drug use and alcohol use. Because all I knew was hockey. Hockey, drinking beer, doing drugs, and chasing women. And I was on the top of my game, so to say. I was making a lot of money, and looked upon by society that I had made it. And now it was all taken away. I knew nothing else. So it was kind of going from up here and then down here. And that's when the cocaine use and alcohol use and self-medication, along with Xanax and Percocets for pain, and that became really, really prevalent, and really set the tone for the next 7-8 years of my life, which I would never change any aspect of it, because it brought me to where I am today. But it was a dark time, really dark time. I attempted suicide and really, really, really difficult stuff.
And during this whole process, that you're going through this, obviously your parents, being very caring and understanding, they're by your side, and they're wondering what took place, what has happened to our son. Can you kind of, in your own way, express what you felt at that time? Like, did you feel like you disappointed them, or did you feel like, what the hell's going on with them? Like,
yeah, I think the first thing to understand is that I left at 20, I left to play professional hockey in Chicago, and I wasn't spending a lot of time with my parents other than in the off season. And because, like I think a lot of addicts do, they try to hide their behaviors and that from the people close to them because you don't want to hurt them. And that's kind of who I was. So from 23 to 25, I was living in Chicago. I wasn't coming home at all. And that's when the drug use got the worst. Under the house of my folks, my mom was like a detective. So you weren't, and they weren't, and back then cocaine and that wasn't really spoken about in the way that it is now. It's a lot more prevalent in sports. It was people just thought that I had a drinking problem or that I like to drink a lot. So what I was feeling, if I didn't have the love of my mother and father, I 100% would have jumped off a bridge in front of a bus or blew my brains out for sure. 100%. I did not want to be here. I was, especially from 23 to 25 there, at 27, I was just in a dark place. But I couldn't bring myself to do that to them. I thought it would devastate them. Although I felt if I OD'd, that maybe that wouldn't fall so hard on them. So you don't really know what to do. I mean, I didn't have any faculties. I had no education. I really had nothing, other than the hopes to get back playing and come back from injury. So it's hard to really put it into context. You're trying to hide and not keep sure. Yep.
Sorry for interrupting.
No, it's okay.
Luke,
no, it's okay.
Because I've got this, so was it alcohol and the drug? Was that because of the emptiness and the void and the possibility of, am I good enough? Like your internal dialogue? Or was it more to do with a habit, because this habit was formed in your teens and you're just going to keep doing it because your body craves it? Like, I'm not 100% sure, why one would continue. So was it one or the other, or was it something completely different?
I'd say a little bit of both. You don't really have any other way to deal with it. I mean, if I go back now to that experience I had when I was 6 and what happened there, I made a decision as a young child in that moment that I wasn't good enough, that I couldn't ask for help, and that nobody was there to help me. Nobody was there to hear me because of the nature of the way the molestation took place, which was no fault of anybody close to me or my parents. I mean, it was just nobody could have prevented that from happening. But as a child, because of the level of imagery and the way that I'm working in different practices now, I've gone back to the experience there and relived the whole thing and was able to see the decision I made. So that I'm not good enough, I need to be seen, and I can never ask for help. And I grew up to be someone who needed to be seen as an athlete, couldn't ask for help, self-medicated, and didn't feel like anyone would anyone would actually want to assist me. So the self-medicating aspect of it was just the archetype in which I was. And again, growing up in a heavily chauvinistic masculine culture, and that asking for help and showing weakness is fundamentally not something you do. Being vulnerable is not something you do. Although going out and getting stone drunk and doing drugs for 2 days and sleeping with 5 or 6 different women is something that is celebrated within the locker room, something that you look at yourself as being a big, man on campus, which is completely ridiculous. So I think the addiction for me more than anything was to stimulation and excitement, the addiction of being somebody, being seen. And I had no self-love or compassion for myself. So naturally, where was I looking for it? In anything that made me feel wanted. And you could always control the way that a beer went down your throat or the way that you could get a hold of drugs, and a woman wanting to be with you was the way in which I was connecting with people. And I couldn't feel anything either. Like I didn't have the ability to connect with people. It just wasn't. I was functioning in a heavily analytical way and craving that level of notoriety and recognition that I had as a hockey player playing, in front of 10, 15, 20,000 people. And all the while, not even understanding what I'm doing, just thinking that I've got it together, thinking that, I'm going to get back to what I love to do. Or even when I was playing before I was hurt, this is just regular behavior. I mean, you
didn't know the difference.
Oh, you don't know the difference. I mean, the stories that went on, in back in the 70s and 80s of guys playing hockey or even sports at the highest level. I mean, you see right now, you've got Michael Jordan on Netflix, The Last Dance, and he's talking about when he came into the league in the 80s and guys are smoking cigarettes between quarters and doing cocaine all the time and drinking. This is what comes with this overstimulated way of the way we have this huge separation within society. People making all kinds of money that are just being acknowledged for their physical abilities. Naturally, it's a very archaic and chauvinistic environment, and there's no shortage of women or people, bar owners, drug dealers, people that want to hang around with you that make you feel that way. So you literally feel like you're on top of the world. You feel like you've got it all figured out.
Yes.
Got a little bit of money in the bank, but it's all living out here.
Yes.
And eventually it's going to come to a halting stop.
Yes.
Right. You know, I'm fortunate it didn't take my life. I have a lot of close friends that dealt with the same types of things. And a lot of it too was due to traumatic brain injury from concussions. Which is where the predisposed addictive behavior to alcohol and drugs and that and stuff came from. So the science now shows that. I mean, when I was diagnosed with depression, anxiety, ADHD, and bipolar spectrum at the age of, I think, 24, 25, then they didn't realize that head trauma could cause these types of symptoms and that. And I was told basically go get a job pumping gas because you're never going to equate to anything else in life. And you think you're broken. So I mean, what else do you know how to do? You get some instant relief from here and there, even though you don't like yourself, you have no relationship with yourself, but it's all that you know.
Yeah. So now looking at where you are today, and I'm going to keep you in that zone still. How do you think that society or community or parenting could have helped you at that time, or could they have at all?
No, I don't, there's nothing that could have, more and more times that I'm seeing, and even in the people around me, that our lives need to run their course. I mean, the only way that there would have been any support there or saving me was if we had a completely different social structure than we have today, one that's driven from love and not fear. So, I mean, our education system, medical system, all of that stuff, which I truly believe that, and I experience it, that us as human beings are doing the best we possibly can. The difficulty here is that the system is broken. The system's fractured. The system is heavily influenced on competition, economic growth, and keeping most of the population subdued so that a select few can get ahead. And even those individuals, God, I have the most love and respect for them because I believe they're doing the best they possibly can. So we just have a structure on this planet that isn't working. We're seeing it more now than ever. There's nothing that could have been done back then to save me. I mean, God knows, and the people close to me, that my mom and my father, I mean, my mom scratched and clawed. If it was not for that beautiful lady who I have such a beautiful relationship with today, there is no possible way that I would still be here. I'd either be dead or be in prison for the rest of my life.
Wow.
Yeah, without question. There's nothing stronger than a mother's love. Nothing. It literally kept me alive. And even to this day, I lean on that for such support in that, because I mean, not that a father's love isn't, but we understand the nurturing aspect of it. So that everything that could have been done was done, because I wasn't listening to anybody. I had all the answers.
Yes.
I knew the answers. You know, like a lot of young people, you couldn't tell me, and I had some money. So I signed for $500,000 at the age of 20 was my signing bonus.
Yeah.
So you try to tell a kid who's got some notoriety, got some money, and thinks he's got it all figured out, that hopeless.
Yeah. Fame and fortune and women and you name it,
Yeah.
you had it all. Well, and yet there was this emptiness. There was this part of you that was going to awaken. And I am so glad that you did not take your life and that your mother was by your side. And so we've come to the end of our first half of the segment of listening to an incredible journey with Luke Sellars, an ex-professional ice hockey player. And I have never known all of the complete journey which Luke is sharing with us today. And he's just a beautiful, beautiful soul from the day that I met him. There's so many things about him that I could go on and on about. There's a part of him, there's a part of you, Luke, that reminds me so much of my younger son. I always that. So on that note, I just want to thank you again, and we will have Luke's balance of his journey shared with us right here at Uplifting Humans, where we honor, empower, educate, and inspire the listener with real stories and expert advice. Thank you for tuning in, And I look forward to hearing the balance of this. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you, Sal. Thank you for having me. You're doing a beautiful thing here.